I'm going to talk about Peter today, lessons from Peter in the Bible. He's one of my absolute favorite characters of all time in anything. But on the way down, I was really struggling with how to open up, and I guess I already have with that turkey story. But yeah, I guess we've started now. So phase two. I really felt like God wanted me to share about your pastors who weren't supposed to be here, but now they're sitting right here. So I get to talk about them to their face, which is great. All good things. If you're here for the first time, hopefully you feel what it is that I'm about to talk about, because this is a really cool church. It's a really special place to be a part of on a Sunday. And every time Sam invites me to come down and speak, I'm like, yes. And then I'm like, I wish I had remembered what I talked about last time, because I feel like I'm just repeating myself often. And every time I come down, it's always in my head. It's like a one-off, like, cool, that was a cool invitation. And then he invites me again, and I'm like, oh, awesome. What did I say last time? But I don't know why I felt to share this with you guys, and I guess I'm glad you're here. But there's kind of three types of pastors. Pastors is a word that we use, and it comes from the idea of shepherding, to shepherd a flock, to be in charge of. If you've ever worked with sheep, you understand that that's not a super easy job unless you really spend the time to understand your flock and know who it is that is following you. But there's three types of shepherds in the analogy that I'm going to use. And there's also about 1,000 different types of sheep, and each sheep needs a different type of shepherd in a different season. So these things are fluid that I'm about to tell you, but each shepherd has their kind of default on how they lead. So there's shepherds that lead from the front. The flock needs to see where they're going. They need to have clear understanding of what the objective is. So there's a shepherd who leads from the front and trusts the sheep to follow. And then there's a shepherd who leads from the back, who has people in or sheep in the congregation, people in the congregation who understand the objective and can lead, and the shepherd from the back kind of corrals and corrects with the staff and just kind of, oh, not that way, we're just going to keep going this way, and oh, not over there, we're just going to keep, just follow the herd, and generally trusts the herd on where to go. And then there's the third type, which leads from the middle. It's a shepherd that is so confident with where the sheep or the flock or the congregation is headed, so confident with the people that are around them, that are serving with them, that they understand this ship is for all intents and purposes is running itself. Like, we get to be a part of this, we get to partake in this, and those are the pastors that you generally just feel like, oh man, they just know God and they understand their role here on earth. And I wanted to suggest that your pastors are very much that third type, that they're in the congregation, they sit with you, they cry with you, they dance with you, they laugh with you, they're a part of your lives, they understand what it is to be a member of this church and to be in Whakatane and to understand you guys. And actually it's maybe fitting that they are here and they're leading from the middle. They did nothing to set up today, well, apart from the years of work that they have done. But they've been on holiday and they get to show up and they get to partake in what's going on, and that's actually really cool. That doesn't happen all over the world, that there are pastors that trust the people around them. So thanks for supporting them. Thanks for being a part of their team, and thanks to you guys for having me back and letting me speak, and thanks for being awesome pastors. Yeah, it's evident in the way that your congregation is. So, Peter. Yeah, go on, clap for them. They're amazing. That's really cool. Yeah. What a great time to be down here talking about Peter's understanding and his expectation, and how expectations aren't always what ends up being the case. Back in November, a really good friend of mine invited me down to the South Island to go for a hike, and we've been trying to catch up for years and years and years, and he's been doing all sorts of tramps all throughout the Southern Alps, and he's been getting into it, and he's really fit, and his friend is a dairy farmer, and he's been going on all these tramps with him, and he is also really fit. And at that time in my life, I'd been driving tractors, which is almost zero effort physically. It's a lot of mental effort, but it's almost no effort physically. So he was like, hey, let's go for this hike. How fit are you? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm reasonably fit. Like we can go for a good tramp. That'd be fine. 2-day tramp. Sweet. Let's do it. And so he's like, cool, come on down. And so I flew down there and we start driving, from the airport, just driving straight to the mountains. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. And he's describing the hike that we're about to go on, and it's gonna be great, and we're really looking forward to it. We pick up his friend, so it's Maddie, Max, and myself, and we get to the parking lot, and we get out, and it's just vertical. And he was like, "Oh, that's way steeper than I thought it was gonna be." And we had started way later in the day than we were expecting. We were like, oh, we might get out there by 12, 1 o'clock-ish. We ended up getting out there by like 3:30. Actually, it might have been even a little bit later, but it was 5 Ks distance with a K of altitude out the gate. So we just went straight up the mountain and then traversed along the top of it, and we get to the hut and it's dark already, and I'm like, oof, that was a big day for me. And he's like, hey, don't worry, tomorrow we just go along the ridgeline and then we descend into the valley, and that's tomorrow. And I'm like, cool. So we sleep and we wake up, and the rain is just coming in, and it's supposed to be clear, and it's just raining, and the rain is coming in sideways, and he's looking at the forecast, and he's like, it should clear, it should clear, it should clear. It should clear by 1 o'clock, and that should be plenty of time to get down. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, we started yesterday later than we had intended, so we should probably start today way later than we intended. It gets to 1 o'clock, it's raining sideways, and we're like, well, we gotta go. Like, can't wait any longer, so we get out there, and it's just... Man, it's so wet, and it is not a flat hike. We start with 300 meters straight up, and then across the top for about 2 Ks, and then just descend for like another 8 Ks, and it is way longer. It ended up being like a 10-hour hike where he had guessed that it should be like 4 to 5 hours. And we got to the hut, and I was well and truly done, and everything was wet. I had a really nice rain jacket, but it was raining sideways. The conditions were as bad as they could have possibly been without it being cold. Like, it was probably like 18, 19 degrees, and if it had been cold, that would have been, visibility was like 20 meters at best, and then it would like pack in, and I wouldn't be able to see them. I'm like, oh, geez, they're gone, but I'm just gonna keep going. Anyways, we get to the end of that, and I'm like, this is not what I expected. And thankfully, the other two were like, this is not what we expected. That was way harder. And I'm like, good, thanks. You said it first. I agree with what you've said. And so we got to the end of that second day, and they were like, hey, we'll just hike out the riverbed tomorrow to the highway and hitchhike back to the truck. And I'm like, yep, that's a good plan that you've come up with. I was ready to go back over the saddle, but I'm glad you've decided this. But on the walk out, we talked about how awesome it was and how incredible it was, and we would have loved to have seen the views, because apparently it's great views at the top. We're on the ridge for like 2.5 Ks, and it's just a cliff on one side and like a steep, it is just crazy. It was so wild. I got done with it, and we kind of debriefed it a little bit, and we're like, that was pretty hectic. Like, we're very exposed up there, and if something had happened, like a twisted ankle, or like, it was not great. It was not great. So I told my wife that it was fantastic, and we had a great time. And the sun was shining, and she should definitely let me do it again. But expectations are really hard to manage, and expectations are really hard to understand and to quantify when things aren't what you expected them to be. There's often like a lapse between your understanding and then you're like actually figuring it out, right? Like you can at that moment, you can be like, oh, it's still raining sideways, but I don't really understand what that means for me until I'm laying down at the end of this hike and I'm looking back and I'm like, whoa, that was crazy. Like that was different, and it takes a while. There's a lapse in that understanding. So we're talking about Peter and his lapse of understanding, because Peter was raised in a time and a place where there is thousands of years of tradition of expecting and waiting for this king to arrive, and his understanding of this king, given Israel's history, brief history. Israel started with a nomadic man named Abraham, and God came to him and said, hey, I'm gonna make you the father of my people. And he was like, sounds good to me. Don't fully understand it, but I'm here for it. And then he had a son, and his son had a son, and that son became Israel, was his name that was changed. Jacob became Israel. And almost immediately from Abraham, a little bit of turmoil, Isaac, a little bit of turmoil, Jacob, lots of turmoil. Jacob became Israel. Israel almost immediately goes into slavery. And we're talking like the most weird form of slavery, I think, in history, because they're invited in, right? They're like, hey, hey, yes, yeah, we love you. Come on in. Come be a part of this thing that we got going on. Work the land with us. Be our friends, like be our neighbors. And then one king later, they're like, actually, we don't like you very much. And now you're all slaves. Thanks for being here. Now instead of working with us, you're going to work for us. And all of the land that you did have, that's like the best land, we're going to take that back from you. And just like brutal slavery that then goes on for 400 years. Just crazy. Out the gate, Israel's understanding of being a nation is gone. No holy book, no shrines, no temples, no pilgrimages, like nothing that creates a culture of a religion or a people group, a nation. And then after that, they enter a bizarre season of wandering around the wilderness, and they're still like, who are we? And God gives them laws and rules and starts building this nation. And they're like, okay, we've got a little bit of identity, but in order to have a place, we have to go and capture this land. And so they go and do that, and they have a little bit of success and prosperity, and then they start fighting internally. And then from there, they get a king who's not supposed to be a king. And they weren't ever supposed to have a king in the first place, so their identity continues to be a struggle and a grapple, and then they get conquered, and then they split as a nation, and the northern part of the nation gets conquered, and they just disappear completely. And then years later, the southern part gets conquered, and they go into exile again, and slavery again, and then they come back. And so Peter's understanding of history is that success is conquering and not being conquered. And currently in Peter's situation, he is very conquered. The Romans are occupying, and the Romans had a crazy way of occupying where they would come in and they would take over and they would set up like an apartheid system where they're like, we rule and we reign, but you guys can do your own thing as well, but under us. You're subjugated. You're slaves, but you're on like the slightly more free side of slavery, which is a crazy psychological thing to grapple with, where you're like, I can be a Jew, but between the hours of this and this, it's like being on your restricted. It's like being on your religious restricted. You're allowed some things, but you're also not. And for all of you who can drive, your restricted is like such a weird, frustrating time, because you're like, oh no, I gotta go. And then, yeah, it's not great. It's not great for building confidence. It's not great for building identity. And so Peter's understanding of this king to come is that at some point, someone's going to come and he's going to be like a Hercules or like a great gladiator that's going to come in, and he's going to lead us to victory and subjugation of the Roman Empire. And then from that, the world as we know it is going to be under the Jewish reign. We're going to be the top dogs. We're going to be the alpha. And that's the way that he understood everything that was about to come. He's also kind of like a high school dropout. Like he made it to a certain point, and then there was a big test, and he didn't pass the test, so he got to go be a fisherman instead of like the really cool job, which was in the temple and like serving the Lord. So he failed that. And so here's this guy, Peter. He's just fantastic in my opinion, because he is just such a great representation of somebody who is just like constantly misunderstanding everything, but always trying. Anyways. Let's get into Peter's life. In Matthew 17, the first story that I'm going to talk to you about is, this is so funny, man. This is so funny. So picture like the worship time that we just had. Picture the moment where all the instruments were quiet, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Kelly was singing, and it was this moment that was like, whoa, this is beautiful, and like everyone's on board, and there's this like, oh, cool, we're like doing something. So in Matthew 17, verses 1 through 8, it's called the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus is up there, and it's just probably the most insanely deep peace and transfiguration, and like something's happening, and the worship is going off, and all of heaven is leaning in, and Elijah's there, and Moses is there, and Peter's there. And Peter's like, whoa, this is crazy. And in that moment, he goes up to Jesus, and he's like, Jesus. Should I make tents for you and Moses and Elijah? Should I make tents? And I picture myself when I was a youth pastor, this youth coming up to me and completely missing the moment and being like, hey, this really cool thing is happening, but should we start stacking chairs? No, what? Stop. Focus on what's happening. Do you see what's going on? Like Jesus, the transfiguration. And Peter's like, tents? Should we be making tents? Did he like bring his tent kit with him? Is he capable of making tents out of like the shrubs on the side of the mountain? Like he is so missing the point. Should I make tents? No, Peter. And God, far more graciously than I've ever handled a situation like that, just speaks to him. And actually, we can read it. God's reply to him. So we'll pick up in verse 5. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise and have no fear." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. So it's this like crazy moment. And Peter's like, "Should I make tents?" And God responds and he goes, "You're missing it. This is my son. This is my son." God reveals like, this is my son. And Peter's like, "Oh," and hits the floor with the other disciple that's there with him. Just this crazy moment. And we're going to go through a couple more stories of where Peter just doesn't get what's going on. Another one is in John chapter 13. This is another fantastic example of Peter's attitude towards life, because it's the Last Supper. That's the setting. They don't really know what's going on, but at the start of it, Jesus comes in and he starts taking off his robe and he gets the bowl of water and he's going to start washing the feet. And you have to kind of make up the scenario a little bit yourself, because it doesn't give you word for word exactly what's going on. But I picture that he's started washing and he's done a couple, and then he gets to Peter and Peter goes, "Don't wash my feet, I'll wash your feet." And Jesus is like, "No, Peter, like you're missing it." And what Jesus says to him, again, is so kind. He says to him, "What I'm doing you don't understand now, but afterward," this is John chapter 13, verse 2. "What I am doing now you don't understand, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus is like, Peter. Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." And so Peter flips the script and he's like, "Well then, Jesus, not only my feet, but also wash my hands and my head, wash all of me." And Jesus is like, "Man, okay. You're the youth that just, okay, cool. The one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, Peter. Like, I just need to wash your feet because you're clean already. And so just let me wash your feet, Peter. Just let me wash your feet," is basically what Jesus is saying. Like, you'll understand this at some point, but right now, you just don't get it. So we'll move again to another story. In Matthew 16, when they're walking along and Jesus asks them, who do the people say that I am? And kind of like the cacophony of disciples, probably always vying for Jesus' attention, trying to give the best answer, trying to like make it known to Jesus that they get what's going on, even though they clearly don't. So they're like, verse 3, where am I at? 16, right? No, sorry, I apologize. Yeah, Matthew 16. Sorry, I was just in 17. Verse 13. "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And all the disciples are like, "One of the prophets, John the Baptist. Others say Elijah. We don't really know, but we're just throwing out our best guesses." And the youth pastor always loves that. Like, just give it a go. Just give it a shot. That's great. Appreciate it. And then he says, "But who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter seizes the moment and he's like, "You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. I just heard that on the mountain where I offered tents and you said no. I've got this. You're the Son of God." And Jesus answered him and he says, "Blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father." That's right. You're telling us what just happened. "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. So there's this moment where Peter just nails it. He's just like, "Yep, you're the Christ. Like, I get it because I just saw it." And Jesus is like, "Absolutely." And what he speaks into him is this incredible prophetic, speaking to his name. You are Peter, which is Petros, which came from Cephas, which is rock. You are the rock on which I'll build my church. So Peter is like very, very loosely the reason why we're meeting here, because he like established the modern day church, or what was the modern day, what we do now. That was Peter. Peter had this moment where he was like, I get it. And Jesus was like, you're going to make it. You're going to make it. You've so totally got this. And then we'll move on to the next one, where, yeah, great, in the garden, in John chapter 18. John 18, so this is kind of after the Last Supper, and I was talking with a youth pastor friend of mine recently, and we're talking about Peter and how like the disciples probably started like using his name as like, oh, you pulled a Peter, like you thought you knew but you didn't. And this one just like, this exemplifies it so much more. So they're in the garden after the praying thing, and Jesus is there, and then the guards come up and they're like, we've got you. There was no Facebook, so they needed Judas to like say that's Jesus, because everybody looked relatively the same, beards, dirty feet, like everybody was, kind of in the same camp. So Judas comes up and he's like, this guy, and he's like, I am the guy. And then Peter's like, this is the moment. And I could see Peter standing behind Jesus, like kind of like elbowing, and they're like, we're taking Rome. We're taking Rome. This is the moment. This is the moment where like the guards are here and Jesus is here, and he pulls out his sword, and he just like, I don't know if he's really good with a sword or if he's just like in a blind rage, just like swinging around, and this poor guard's ear got in the way. Like, I don't actually know. I've never been in sword combat, but I don't actually know how you just get an ear and nothing else. Like, it could have been. He could have had like big ears. He could have been a wrestler and had like cauliflower ear going on, and it was just a really good target. But I don't even still, how do you like, was he like leaning in for it? Because wouldn't you hit? I don't know. I've never dueled with a sword, like I said. Anyways, Peter has got it. This is the moment where Jesus is coming in to take over, and he rips out his sword and he just starts flailing and he catches an ear, and Jesus is like, Peter, again, man, I thought you had it, but you clearly don't. And he gets the dude's ear and lovingly puts it back on. And Peter's like, I don't know what's going on, man. Who are you if this isn't what you're here for? Why are we doing this whole thing? And then later that night, poor Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and this is a huge thing. And he's like, I can imagine Peter just being like, this makes no sense to me. For thousands of years, but we've been waiting for you to come, and you're just willingly giving yourself up. You're just willingly going into this. You're just walking into this when, like, you can put ears back on. Surely you can take them off. Like, you're Jesus. I get it now. You're the Son of God. You're all powerful. We're not necessarily going to win with swords, but you're going to like speak words and everyone's going to fall. And he just doesn't get it. And he's like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why we're here for this. And then last story. So we'll go back to Matthew 16 real quick, where Matthew 16, verse 21 to 23. So this is just after he got it. This is just after he said, you're the Christ. And all the disciples are like, ooh, nice answer, Peter. And Jesus was like, yep, Peter, nailed it. You're the rock on which I'll build my church. And then the very next paragraph, Jesus begins telling them what's going to happen and how he's going to suffer and how he's going to die. And he like tells Peter and gives Peter the plan. And Peter speaks up and he's like, far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen. And again, just like rebukes this guy that he just called the Christ. Like, Peter is so far from understanding. It's crazy. And Jesus turns to him and he says, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on things of God, but on things of man. So Peter is this shining example, at least to me in my life, of what it looks like to have these expectations of what a hike should look like, of what my life should look like, of what marriage should look like, of what parenting should look like, of what all of these things should look like. Peter's a shining example of being like, this is the way, and Jesus being like, not quite. That is not quite the way. And so the reason why I've set up all these stories of Peter being the way that Peter is, which is fantastic and so wrong. The reason why I've set up all these stories is because I think that, and this is kind of, I know it might not make total sense that I've just listed all these reasons why Peter got it wrong, and now I'm kind of closing the message. But Peter Peter is so wrong in so many situations, and Jesus chose him to build his church on. That youth that is just always, I'm just like, man, you clearly don't understand what's happening here. You want to stack chairs in the middle of worship? Like, what's going on? You want to build tents? Peter, you're chopping dudes' ears off. You're like rebuking me for wanting to wash your feet. Like, that's a nice thing anyways. Like, just let it be a nice moment. And Peter is so often wrong, but he is always, always passionate. And his passion is always, always something that God can use, always. Your passion is always a tool that God can use for the building of his church. So I'd like to suggest at the end of this that, and the band, you can start making your way up if you'd like. Hopefully I don't ramble too long while you're standing up here. I'd like to suggest that the world is convinced on teaching us that understanding is better than passion. I think the world is intent on saying, and I'm not saying anything negative against these things that I'm about to say. I'm just saying that they don't beat raw passion. They're not better than. It's not better to have a theological degree than raw passion. It's not better to have insane, in-depth, crazy understanding than raw passion. It's not better to be able to be a wizard on an instrument or incredible at communicating, or it's not better to have these skills and knowledge. It's not better to have that than to be passionate. To be passionate is something that God clearly can use. This high school dropout who didn't make it to the seminary that he was supposed to go to, became a fisherman, probably not a great fisherman given how erratic his behavior is. Like, he probably got bored real quick of fishing this spot. There's no fish, move on, no fish, move. Like, he's probably not nailing anything in life that he's doing. And then he's walking with God for a long time, walking with Jesus for years, and Jesus is like, do you know who I am? And he's like, yeah, you're the Christ. And then he's like, good job, Peter. And as the Christ, you've read it in your Bible. You understand this, even as a high school dropout back then. You understand all these things have to take place. And then he turns around and rebukes him. And then on the night where it's all supposed to happen, he chops a dude's ear off and denies him. And you're like, Peter, can you just get it together? But Jesus has already spoken into him that he will be the church. He will be the rock on which he builds the church. So while the world is convinced on having deep theological debates and working everything out to a finite degree and understanding and saying, absolutely, this is the case and that is not the case. And while different parties and different groups and even different denominations of church are intent on arguing the logic and the reasoning and the knowledge behind the conversation, Peter is just desperately throwing his weight towards Jesus in whatever way he can. And Jesus recognizes that and says, man, you're going to be useful. You're going to be so useful to my kingdom. And later on in life, Peter goes on and writes a couple of epistles. I highly recommend reading 1st and 2nd Peter. 1st Peter, this is so awesome. After the thing happened, right, Easter, we just went over that. They're probably all super depressed for a couple days. Jesus comes back. They're like, okay, this is how we take the land, through the lessons of the life of Jesus. Wow, light bulb. And then Peter goes on and writes an epistle. And 1 Peter is all about the lordship and the servant-hearted nature of Jesus and how that's what we're supposed to be conveying to people. That's how the world will know us, by our love for one another and by living the way that Jesus lived. This guy who is, for the whole time he's with Jesus, passionately doing the wrong thing. Jesus looks at him and he's like, I can use that passion. You don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. You don't have to have all the degrees. Those are great. And if you're on a track or you have those degrees, thank you and keep going and gain more understanding. Don't forsake your passion. Don't forsake that childlike wonder that's like, whoa, Jesus, like that just excitement, those youth and those kids and those igniters and those people that are young adults even, and they've got this like passion and this zeal and this wide-eyed approach to the world. Don't push that down, but learn from them. Learn from those kids that are like fascinated. My daughter right now, she's 4, and she can't stop asking how and why things are. And she just wants to know, how do trees grow and why does it rain and all these questions, and her passion is something that given the life of Peter, I hope I can reflect at least a little bit, and I hope that I can remain passionate. So that's my encouragement to you. And actually, I don't know your name either, but this morning in the prayer circle, we were just calling out the name of Jesus, and he was like, "Hey, can we give it some effort?" And effort doesn't always look like noise. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it looks like raising your hands. Sometimes it looks like dancing. Sometimes it looks like kneeling. Sometimes it looks like trying to make tents in the middle of the worship session, but it always looks like something. Passion always has an expression. So I just want to encourage you guys with that. This incredible family, this awesome place to belong, this very free of judgment, pastors that sit in the middle of the congregation, this place where you're allowed to grapple with and you're allowed to ask the questions. You're probably not allowed to chop each other's ears off, but you're allowed to have that level of excitement towards Jesus. So however that looks for you, I just want to encourage you guys. This is a great place to do it. And this is a great place to grapple. And this is a great place to learn from Peter and to recognize that God is absolutely able to use you. Whatever his plan is, whatever his outworking is here in Whakatane, at your work, at your school, in your life, at your home, in this church, whatever it is, you don't have to be on the front row. You don't have to be on an instrument. You don't have to have the mic. You can just be passionate, and God will use that. Is that cool? Great. We're going to go into a song, and I just want to invite you to be passionate, however that looks.